Welcome back to month 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the Illusion Sampler pattern, my Scrappy version. Here's month 5 right here. We're doing a fun little pineapple, some quarter square triangles, and some squares and squares for some accent strips. Just as normal, I'm not talking sizes and shapes and stuff because I don't want to, upset Scott and going to protect his copyright. But stick around. Let's see how month 5 goes. All right, so here's the fabric for that main block. It's going to be a pineapple block, and I've done a couple of different pineapple blocks in the past. I've done a paper piecing version and another piece version. This one's a little different. I'm not going to lie. I'm really intrigued to see how it's going to turn out. As you can see in front of me, I have a whole slew of different sizes and shapes from all of the different colors of fabric that comes with the instructions, plus a bunch of background 2 squares. So let's dig in and see what this piecing process is all about. Okay, so the first step in the pineapple block is to grab our fabric 4 and to piece fabric 7 and 9 on either side. So we're going to do those 2 seams. We're going to press out away from that center block, and then we're going to attach fabrics 2 and 3 to the bottom and the top. So it looks something like that, and we're going to press away from that center block, and that's going to kind of create a square within a border. Let's go take that to the machine, and I'll be right back. Okay, so you can see I have that middle square, and I've done the first kind of row around the square. And Scott's going to have a square up at each time we have a new row attached. So every time it kind of looks like this. Before we put the pineapple shapes in the corners, he's going to have a square up. So we're not squaring up after each step, it's after every other step. So I did a little straightening, you can see right there. And so, like I said, this is a fun pineapple. What he's going to have us do is we have all those background squares, and I've already drawn that diagonal across. And so we're going to put those in the corners. And I'm going to do the 2 opposite corners first and then go back and do the other 2, because on this first section of it covers up a little bit. So I'm going to do these 2 first, and I'm going to seam right on that drawn line, come back, we'll trim away, and then we'll do the other 2 corners. So let me go take this to the machine, do some stitches, and we'll come back and talk about the next 2 corners and the next layer of color, the next round of color. I'll be right back. Okay, I've done the 2 seams, and instead of, I was actually going to rip these seams out because I want to show you something that it's not quite right. And I thought I'll show you the error, or the mistake, or the not quite so perfect, and talk about what you can do to fix that. So when I open these up, you can see it doesn't quite make that nice square, and it's clipping off a little bit of that corner. It's even worse down here. Look at that one. See how it's not quite squaring up the way it ought to, and it's cut off that corner. So this is something to watch for when you're doing the pineapple. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, rip out this seam. In fact, first I may just do a scant off of it, just to the outside of those. Seam that, and then rip these seams out and see if that looks a little better. So let me take this back to the machine, do those seams, and we'll see if it turns out a little bit better, and you can see if I manage to make it a little nicer looking. So I'll be right back. All right, I went back and redid those little seams, and that's much nicer. Now I get the little corners in, and it folds open a little bit better. And so I'm happier with that. So before I move on and do the other two corners, I'm going to trim away this excess. And you just do that by grabbing your ruler, lining it up on the 1/4 inch, which is right there. See, there's the 1/4 inch line on top of that seam, and swiping away the excess. 1, and this will open back up. There we go. And 2. All right, so there's the lesson for this first half of this pineapple is don't be afraid to take some stitches out and rework it. Next, we're going to do the other two corners. We're going to do the exact same thing. One here and one here. Seam cut away, and then we'll do the next layer of colors. I'll be right back. All right, I've done the last two, and because I learned from those first two, I checked my seam before I finished it to make sure I got those corners nice. So all I got to do is trim away this excess and move on to the next round of color. All right, we'll want to make sure we give that a nice press, and I've just done a slight one, so let me go back to the iron real quick. Okay, there we go. So we're not squaring up here. Remember, we're only squaring up when it's all the different colors on the outside. So next is we're going to add the next round of sashing. And it's going to be the purple and the teal. And then the yellow and the red. So just like we did with the first round, I'm going to attach the sides, press away from that middle block, do the top and the bottom again, press away from that center block, and then we'll come back and we'll do a little squaring up. I am going to point out that we're going to want to hit these corners really nicely so that when I take this to the sewing machine, I'm going to have this side face up. So that way when I'm stitching along, I can make sure I hit that 1/4 inch really nicely so that that nice corner pops really nicely when it's folded back. Just a little tip, let's take this to the sewing machine and I'll be right back. All right, there's the first two, and I did pretty good on my points. So I'm just going to do the top and the bottom, same thing. I'm going to sew with this side up so that I can make sure that I hit those 2/4 inch points. Let me do that and I'll be right back. All right, I've added the next layer next sashing of color, and just like Scott's directions say, this is when we square up. So I did a little quick squaring, and I just want to point out having a nice big square ruler is great for this because it has all those little hashtags, and if you can see, there's even like little angles here so you can aim your corners. So I love this tool. Having a nice big ruler is awesome when you're squaring up. So I did that. That means the next step we're going to do is, once again, those little background triangles. So we need 4 of them. And this time I can go ahead and put all 4 on and do them all in one fell swoop because they don't touch each other. So I'm not sewing over the other ones. So just like before, I'm going to do those seams, and I'm going to try my best to aim for those corners where possible. Looks like I'm going to do pretty good, except for maybe on this one. This one might be off just a smidgen. Yeah, that's okay though. Better done than perfect, right? So let me go and take this to the machine. We'll come back, see how it looks. And there's going to be yet another row of colors. So I'm going to have to zoom out a little bit. And we'll be pretty close to finishing up this pineapple block. So to the machine. All right, so there's the next level, and I've just folded them back so we can see. So all I need to do is take off these excess pieces. So let's do that really quickly. And again, I'm lining my 1/4 of an inch marks up against that seam. And let me take this to the iron really quick. Okay, so we're back, and just like before, we're not squaring up right now. We're going to put those next pieces of sashing on. And in the picture, it shows the light teal and the blue, yellow on the bottom, and orange on the top. Now, let me just give a little tip. If you're finding your block isn't measuring up the size it needs to, this is a trick that I did with, let's see, which one was it? It was the yellow. See, look how I made the yellow not quite line up. I made it more of an 1/8. So let me show you what I did, because I just want to make sure my block's going to make the size that it needs to. So instead of layering it right up next to each other, I'm pulling this back just a smidgen. So it'll be more of an 1/8 of an inch seam on this side, but it's still a 1/4 on that side. And the reason I do that is that way I'm having just a little bit more fabric show up when it's flipped open. That way I know when I go to square down after I get these 4 pieces on, I know I'm going to really hit the size that I need to. So I'm going to do this. I'm just going to be a little shy of the edge with my different colors of fabric before I do the seams, just to make sure. Just a little tip if you're having problems with your fabric not getting to the right size. And I'm using some cheaper fabric, so they're shrinking a little bit as I go to press them. Just want to throw out a couple little tips to help out. So let me go do these 4 seams. We'll come back, we'll square down, and we'll do the last of the pineapple. To the machine. All right, so there's the last row of color. And remember, at this point, this is when we square. And I'm glad I did that little trick where I left a little extra fabric over, because I was able to get a nice square. This is where that great ruler comes in if you have one of those squares. Sadly, mine was a little small for how big this block is, but that's okay. You can use your regular ruler too, and just, pay attention to your mat and your ruler and get the nice square. A rotating mat comes in super handy too when you're squaring up blocks. Love this little guy. I'll put a link in the notes about where you can get this. And now we're ready for the last group of little pineapples. So just like before, grab your 4 little backgrounds with your lines drawn on them. Pop them in the corners. Do that little seam. And then we'll come back, cut off, press, and this pineapple block will be finished. To the sewing machine first, though. All right, and there's that finished pineapple main block. And I did just like we did. I trimmed off the extra and pressed it open. I've also given it a nice little best press because this is going to get set aside as we move on to accent strips. So that's how Scott's doing the pineapple block. As I mentioned before, there are also other ways out there, so be sure you check out other ways. One of my favorites is doing it as a foundation paper piece. So here's a piece of paper that's a very complex pineapple. And if I have time, I'll maybe do this on camera so you can see me speed through a foundation paper piece version of the pineapple, because this is a fun block. It's a very traditional block that you see in like using the repro fabrics are just gorgeous using the pineapple. It's a very fun block. But we're moving on to accent strips next, so give this guy a nice press. set them aside, and let's move on to accent strips. All right, accent strips for month 5. You can see I have 2 piles of fabric. On the left here is a bunch of triangles. These came from bigger squares, which I cut diagonally both way because we're making quarter square triangles again. Yep, we did this I think back in month 1. So you can go back to month 1 video and see a little bit bigger explanation of it. So I'm going to breeze through that. That's one of the strips. A second strip is going to be a square within a square, and you can see that there's background pieces and the different color pieces. So just like the circles, you know, the circle appliques that we had a few months back, they're trading off. So color circle, color square in the center, background surrounded, background square in the center, colors surrounded. So we're going to start with these quarter square triangles and then move on to the square in a square. And let's get started. All right, so quarter square triangles. So we have right now 4 triangles of each of the colors. That's because they started out in a square that we cut in half diagonally. Please note that you'll only be using 1 or 2 of each of these, so you will have some extras left over. And then of course we have a bunch of the background triangles as well. So the way the directions look, and I'll just show the first one, has the 2 pieces. Remember, the quarter square triangle is that hourglass looking square or block, and it looks, the first one looks kind of like that. Now you'll see in the directions that it pairs up another 1, 2, 3, 4 of them to make your accent strip. It doesn't specifically say which colors to use, so you can absolutely mix and match and do something different from what you see in the pictures. And I may or may not do that. We'll see what I like along the way. But just as a refresher, remember when we're putting these together, we're doing them in halves. So we do the 1/2 and the 1/2. We're always pressing towards that darker fabric, which will always be one of the colors. It won't be the background, so that when they come together at that center seam, they'll nest just nicely up there in that center spot. So let's do some quarter square triangles to my machine. Okay, so you can see here, this is the layout for the accent strip, and I did mix it up a little bit. At the back here, that last one, it does the dark teal with that dark blue, and I think that's pretty too close to depth of color, so I picked that light green again because it's so pretty and it'll give it something a little lighter. Like I said, it's your quilt, so you can mix it up. No quilt police here. And I'm going to start taking these to the machine, get them all done, and I'll meet you back here in just a couple minutes. Alright, so I've done half of them, and I know I've shown this before, but I just want to show it one more time. So let me flip this over so that you can really see that, yes, I have pressed to the dark side. And when I talk about nesting, come up so you can see that the 2 fabrics, the red and the green, will butt up next to each other, and that seam will lay right on top of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a pin, I'm going to put a pin right through that thread, and it's going to come out on the other side through the thread that's on the other piece. There we go. So now I'm going to take that to the machine and I'm going to match the edges up and sew it down. But I wanted to show that one more time. I know that I've shown that a few times, but it really is a nice trick to get those seams and those points to really match up very nicely and clearly. So let's do that and I'll meet you at the end. All right, there's our finished quarter square triangles. Now, before we put them in a row and get them all ready, Scott has made these to be a little bit bigger than actually what we need. So we're going to square them down to the appropriate size. And I'm going to grab my rotating mat, and I'll do one of them on camera so that you can see them, even though I've done this before in a previous video, and show a few tips of what I do when I'm squaring down a quarter square triangle. So let me grab everything. All right, so here's everything, and I've got one of my squares sitting on top of my rotating mat, which is a great little additional tool to have, especially when you're squaring up stuff, because then you don't have to pick your piece up. You can just rotate the mat as you need to cut. So when I'm squaring up something like this, I like to use every tool available that I have in my arsenal to make sure I get a nice square cut. So I'm going to be using the mat. I'm going to be using the lines on the mat, the diagonal. You can see I've already placed them to where the diagonal lines up, the diagonal seams. I'm also going to be using a ruler that also has these diagonals. And I'm going to need to know how big your square is so that you can chop that in half and you'll know where the center is. So if you have a 5-inch square that you need to be 5 inches, half of that is 2.5. Now that's not what we have here because I don't want to break any rules or anything, but I'm going to find my half, which is going to be this little point right here, and you can put a little piece of tape or you can mark it with a marker so that you know. And you're going to put it right in the center of that quarter square triangle. So I know that 2 1/4, that's my halfway mark, both for the length and the width. And I've matched my diagonal up that way. And I'm just giving it a good once over with my hands squarely on it to make sure it looks nice. And then I grab the ruler. Now I'm looking at other things too. There isn't a diagonal going this way because it's not the size of this ruler, but I can see the little dots are hitting that diagonal on the other, in the other direction. So like I said, I like to use every tool available that I can before I grab the rotary blade. So once I've got everything good to go, I can grab my rotary blade and I'm going to do the right side and that top before I move everything, because that's what I'm comfortable doing. If you're not comfortable doing that top side and you're only comfortable doing it on, whatever dominant side you're on, then just do that. Just do the one swipe and rotate it. So let me do that real quick. I'm do the side. Hand is placed firmly on that ruler, and then I'm going to do the top. And I'm going to take my hand off very gently so the ruler doesn't move. And I'm going to rotate that mat. And I did a full 180 degrees because I've done now it's the bottom and the left side. And I can pick this ruler up and flip it over. And I'm going to do the exact same thing. I know that 2 1/4 is the center because that's where I put it at the center. I've cut these two sides, so that should measure up nicely on both sides, which it does. The diagonal line is on the diagonal, which is really nice, and those dots are right along that diagonal. So I did a pretty good job piecing this. I'm really proud of myself. Again, I'm just going to take another close look. I'm going to put my hand down firmly on the ruler. I'm going to grab my rotary cutter and do the last 2 swipes. And there we go. So that's what I do to square up all of my quarter square triangles. I'm going to do the other 4. Then we're going to come back and we're going to piece everything together. All right, so I've squared down the quarter square triangles, and now we're ready to sew these all together. This is the red and green one. That's the one that's set aside for its own little individual spot. These 4 get seamed together, and then we press them all towards the right So let me go do that, and I'll be right back. All right, so there's that finished quarter square triangle accent strip and only piece. So this is all done. Let's give them a good press, set them aside, and let's grab the fabric for the other accent strip. Okay, so you can see we have a bunch of little squares, both in the backgrounds and some assorted colors, and then we have some rectangles also in the background and some other assorted colors. So if you remember what I talked about earlier, there was a circle and a square, an applique version a few months back, and it paired up a colored circle with a background and versus a colored background with a background circle. So it's the same principle here, only with squares. So this is what we're going to be doing. The colored squares are going to be paired up with the background rectangles, and the background squares are going to be paired up with the different colors of rectangles. Whew, that's quite a mouthful. Let's dig in and just do one. All right, so the directions, it shows two of them. It shows one with the color in the center and one with the background in the center. So what it looks like is something like this. So the two little rectangles will go on either side of the square for both blocks. We're going to be pressing out and away, just like we did with the pineapple. So this should seem very familiar. And then we'll attach the top and the bottom. Again, we'll press away from that center square, just like we did with the pineapple. And we'll do this another 4 more times with the different colors. So let's go. I'll do one of these on camera and take some pictures as I go, and then I'll meet you at the end when we talk about piecing these together. So let's go. All right, so here is the square in a square block. So we're getting ready to put it into the accent strips. I did straighten them up a little bit, make them all nice and, you know, straight and ready to go. This is the layout that you see in the book: dark teal, red, yellow, blue, orange, and violet. And it's kind of hard to see from the instructions. The backgrounds are definitely put this way with the little small rectangles in the center. You can't tell with the colored ones though if it's supposed to go the same way or opposite. So I'm making the executive decision of doing opposite only because I know this is going to be easier to sew than having all those seams on top of each other and all that bulk right there. So I'm just going to make the executive decision and place it this way. I mean, in the end, it'll look pretty similar because you're supposed to use the same fabric, and I know that I'm different with a couple of them, but that's okay. You know, it's my Scrappy quilt. I can do what I want. And no quilt police here, so if you want to do something different, go ahead as well. So I'm going to seam all of these together, and I'm going to press everything to the right except for that last one, which of course goes to the left, because if you've stuck around and seen any of these other videos, you know that that is going to be nested with another seam at the end of the quilt when we put everything together. So let me go seam all this, and I'll see you in just a moment. All right, so there is the square and the square accent strip all pressed and ready to go. So you know what time it is. Gather all your pieces and let's put this final block together. All right, here's the mess. Let's start with that big block, of course. Let's see, he's going up in the corner, just as usual. And we have our cute little quarter square triangle accent blocks. This guy's going over here, this side. And a single one is down at the bottom, of course. Make sure I can still see everything. There we go. And our square and square that we just did goes right there. So now all we got to do is fill in with the background pieces. We got this sashing for the big block, one on each side. A sash on the bottom and the top of that big square. Lonely square down here in the corner, and of course the two big sashes, or one on the side and one on the bottom. All right, so I'm assuming that you've seen some of these videos already before, because this is going to seem pretty redundant, pretty repetitive. Putting it together, we start here in the block, the main block. We're going to add the sashing. First the sides, we're going to press away from that big block. Then we're going to add the top and the bottom sashing, again pressing away from the big block. We'll move over here to the right to the first accent strip. We're going to attach the background to it. We're going to press towards the outside of the block, that's away from that accent strip. The left side's done, the right side's done. Let's put them together with this seam in the middle, and then we're going to press towards that big block. So that means the entire top is finished. Let's move down to the bottom. All the way at the bottom row, we're going to attach the backing to either side of that lonely little quarter square triangle. We're going to, of course, press away from it. And then we can attach this row to the square in the square. Maxie says hi. And we're going to press down towards that bottom. Top part is done, bottom part is done. We just got to do this middle seam here. And when we do that seam, we're going to press up towards the top of the block, and it'll be finished. So you know what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this to the machine, take a few pictures as I go, and I'll see you at the end. All right, and there she is, month number 5. Cute little pineapple, quarter square triangles, square and a square. Lots of fun this time around, guys. I hope you enjoyed my little video, my little walkthrough. Let me flip her over so you can take a look at the back. See all the fun seams. Yay. Give this feller a good pressing. Maybe add a little best press or starch to keep her nice and flat. Because this isn't the last block. No siree. We have 7 more months to go. So I'll see you next time for the Illusion Sampler, my Scrappy version. And if you liked what you saw, please give her the old thumbs up. Subscribe and share, all that fun stuff. And hey, thanks for joining me today in my quilt lab. And I'll see you next month. Bye-bye.